There was this story that was online for a while. It was in a book, and reportedly there was this man who was involved in something called Operation Black Pegasus. And I watched an interview with him, actual audio, video interview with him, and listened to some audio of an interview of him, including during a time frame when he was in jail in Florida. He had been involved in some sort of covert operations for the government. Among the things he did is he was responsible for coordinating flights for coolers marked vaccines that had something else in them besides actual vaccines. That was one of the things he discussed. But in consideration of these matters related to Operation Pegasus, the Black Pegasus, there was a discussion about a order that had been sent to a man who was trained to engage in very high profile orders commanded by the President of the United States. At the time, the President of the United States was George Bush. And he wrote a letter to Ross Perot, who at that time was an independent candidate for presidential office. It was in the course of consideration of his efforts to campaign for political office. And he wrote him a letter and said, I am somebody who has been called upon to engage in acts of assassination as part of my responsibilities for the American government, but I've been given an order by the president to assassinate you, and I'm not going to do it. And then he proceeded to give information to this effect in the letter that he composed and sent to Ross Perot. And among the things he said is that he had created time capsules, and he had information that was very incendiary and that exposed serious crimes at very high levels. And he had created time capsules, and he had distributed it to media outlets and to other people with an understanding that if he disappeared or if something happened to him personally, those time capsules would be called out. They would be called into effect. There would be a release of information that would be considered to be scandalous and potentially very devastating to people who had infiltrated the government and had used the cover of the government to accomplish nefarious aims, thinking they were going to get away with it. Now, I encountered this information prior to Ross Perot's murder. I believe Ross Perot was murdered. I believe Ross Perot was murdered in connection with a opening of liquidity associated with a back-to-school event in Dallas. I literally believe that that's what happened. I watched on another level while there were factors going on. Were considering terminal hedges on specific people that they intended to do in conjunction with a back-to-school event in Dallas. Now, it was a very important anniversary in connection with some of the people that were participating in this back-to-school event in Dallas. And I just watched, within 3 years, how back-to-school events in another city had been used for comparably nefarious purposes. I tried to report it, tried to do what I could. I followed up on it the best I could. I'm continuing to follow up on it now. And the point I'm making is that this man understood that somebody expected that they were going to be able to call him up to eliminate their political opposition for no other reason than that person probably was actually qualified for the position and could, in a actual democratic contest, defeat them. And that was just considered to be unacceptable. That's my understanding of why he said no. Even if you justify having on your payroll or at your disposal people who were actually trained in acts of assassination, trained killers, including, I don't know, snipers, or maybe another level of sniper. Even if you justify that for some reason, even if you try to find a way to justify exceptions to existing executive orders, existing pieces of legislation, existing international arrangements that make it illegal to engage in acts of assassination of heads or representatives of state of foreign countries, including countries that are identified as being in conflict with the United States. Even if you make a justification somehow that for whatever reason there may be a moment or a circumstance under which a targeted liquidation is what they used to call it. Targeted liquidation of insert the name of the particular national entity of concern, leadership, right? Even if you make some sort of justification or allowance for that, and you got to understand that the people that you expect to take those orders also have a duty to be cognizant and conscious of the implications. And if they need to say no, what do you expect them to do? Now, I bring this up because I've wondered for some time if the accusations connected to the Panama Papers were somehow associated with that specific incident. With that specific incident and with the other things correlating with the release of the Panama Papers. If I'm correct, my understanding is that the Panama Papers were a series of documents, millions of documents. If I'm not mistaken, there were 11 million pages of documents that were leaked. Now, these would be documents that were in some sort of electronic format, digital format, either scanned or electronically submitted to a law firm in Panama. And that these documents were actually hacked from the law firm of concern in the fall of 2015, which was a time frame during which there was a ongoing presidential election in the United States. There's election activity in other countries as well. And there was notable changes happening in terms of transition of timelines that were occurring in the fall of 2015. I did not know at the time, but I was making a trip from Central America into the United States around the time frame that I understand that they say the actual hack of the Panama Papers occurred. And in the course of that situation, after going back and putting timelines together, there was a 3-day period of time where I had access to a particular kind of energy, an inspiration. I attributed it to having been out of the country for over 6 months, returning to the country. And after being out of the country for 6 months and returning to the country with all of my observations, I did some meditation, and then after that meditation, I had an outline for a proposed article. That was also, I guess you could call it a policy analysis piece. And I wrote it. I wrote it very clearly, very lucidly, and at the time, I had very substantial confidence in what I had written. I believed it was factually correct. I believe the analysis was sound, and while provocative, I supported it. And I sought input from other people in my community, including in connection with the community I just left. Even though I had some acrimony or some contestation with some of the decisions that had been made by my former colleagues, as well as people that might have been in a opposition perspective around the political implications of the policy being determined, I sent them that article. I put a version of that article into a situation where it could be made available for them to read with an understanding that I wanted them to respond. I needed their critique and I needed their input before going through the process of formalizing and officially allowing it to be made for publication. And my intent was that it was going to be published in a considerable publication. I hoped, for instance, that it would be published in something like the New Yorker or another, maybe something like Vanity Fair. I really thought it was at that level, and that the kind of provocation that it presented was the kind of thing that needed an audience like that. Now, I did not hear back from my colleagues, and I did not even hear back from the people who might have had an opposition perspective to me in consideration of who I would have considered my colleagues. But I actually think that these issues and what they concern are equivalent. I think that when you agree to use the safety of minors and children as political leverage, that it is on par with the risk you assume when you agree to engage in covert operations for the elimination of a head of state. You don't use one as a subterfuge to cover up for the other. If you believe that the head of state is corrupt, then it is incumbent upon you to engage in impeachment process. If they are involved in crime, it is incumbent upon you to find a means by which to have their immunity protections prevented from allowing for them to continue abusing their position, but you don't leverage the safety of children or use children as human shields to cover up for criminals that infiltrated the government and are attempting to abuse the powers of their office, including in recruitment of child soldiers, including in acts of prostitution of children, including in child labor, including in speculations on the futures market concerning the primary identity documents of children, including in acts of securities fraud that might be based on issuance of primary identification documents up to and including their driver's license. Because any one of those children might one day be the president. Or any one of those children might well one day be the kind of person that would sign up to serve the president. And there's no reason why every single child should not be treated like that is their personal possible future.